Hi, my name is Gary Chaffee. Today we're going to be talking about some of the materials and the concepts that I've developed over the years and that are contained in my pattern series of books. And the way that we're going to do this is by taking some musical situations and then talking about how you could use this material in these situations. Now, I've been very fortunate in my teaching that I've had many fine students who have gone on to be some of the top players in the industry. And the one thing that you can say about all of these guys is that they all play differently. In other words, each guy has his own unique style. And I feel that it's very important for young players to try to develop their own style rather than just imitating other kinds of players. And a lot of the materials that I've developed will help you to do this. We're going to begin by looking at a musical concept that's kind of basic to all styles of playing, and that's phrasing. In the most basic sense, a musical phrase is like a sentence in words. In other words, it has a beginning and it has an end. And no matter whether you're playing grooves or you're playing solos or fills, you must phrase. In other words, it's the way that we organize our ideas in musical time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some examples and show you how you can develop phrasing facility. To begin with, I'm going to start with a sticking from my system. This happens to be a 5-note sticking, and the sticking is right, left, left. And I'm going to use this pattern in triplets. And so in order to make it fit into the triplet rate, what I'll do is I'll add a 6th note in my bass drum. So the entire pattern will be right, left foot. So I'm just going to play a little time, and then I'll play this figure around the drums a few different ways. So just kind of listen to what it sounds like and watch the motions. Now, I could keep going like this and play the same pattern in lots of different ways, but the point is that when you start to work on a basic figure, if you only do it in one or two ways, then all you're going to have is a lick. In other words, every time you play it, it'll come out exactly the same. But by making it a point to work on these kinds of figures in different ways, in other words, to learn to move them around the drums in different ways, you'll develop a lot of flexibility, and then you'll be able to use the figure to do exactly what you want to do with it. Now, to make this into my complete phrase, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a second figure, a very common figure that most of you have probably played lots of times. This is really a linear figure, and it's just right, left, and foot. So it fits into one beat of triplets. And I'll do the same thing with this figure. I'll play some time, and then I'll move it on the drums a little bit. Now, when I was playing that figure, I want to point out a couple of extra things that I was doing. One was that some of the times I would take the note that I was stepping in the bass drum, and I would instead step it in the hi-hat. This is real easy to do on these kinds of figures, and it will give you another sound to kind of incorporate into the phrase. The second thing was some of the time you could hear me doubling up on some of the single strokes. In other words, instead of playing right, left foot, I'd play right, left foot. And this is also very easy to do on these kinds of linear phrases. So these are both things that you can kind of play around with when you first start working with these figures. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take these two figures and make them into our phrase. And when you first start doing this, what you want to do is to take the smallest, shortest, simplest versions that you can find to work with. So in this case, since we're playing in 4/4 time, what I'll do is I'll play one of those 6-note figures and then two of the 3-note figures, so it will fill one measure worth of triplets. Now, since we've already done some motion with these things and we have some flexibility, you should be able to move the pattern around the drums fairly easily. So let's see what this would sound like. Now, what this is called is a symmetric phrase because it fits into the time exactly. In other words, I'm playing in 4/4 time, and I got this figure that equals 4 beats. And it's very easy to set up lots of phrases like this. For example, if I wanted to set up a longer one, maybe like a 2-measure phrase, then what I might do in the first measure is to play 2 of those 6-note figures, and then in the second measure play 4 of the 3-note figures. So it would fill up 2 measures worth of triplets. Let's see what that would sound like. So when you first start working on figures like this is a good kind of routine to use. In other words, to set up these nice, short, symmetric phrases that fit evenly into the time. So you kind of get familiar with the material. However, one of the more interesting things you can do with this kind of material is to set it up in what are called asymmetric phrases. And that means a phrase where the figures don't exactly fit into the time. And so I'm going to do an example of this type of phrase, and how I'll do it is I'm going to use one of the 6-note figures and one of the 3-note figures, which will actually equal 3 beats of the measure. So the figure, rather than kind of going up and down on the time, is kind of going to roll through the time. So let's see what this would sound like. So when you're working on these kinds of figures, this is a basic approach that I would use. In other words, what I would do first is start with the individual figures within the phrase that you're setting up and work them out on the drums a little bit, and then to combine them into these short kind of symmetric kinds of phrases, and then once you get that together, to kind of open it up, do some of the asymmetric phrases. Now, the more that you do this, you're eventually going to get to the point that it doesn't make any difference how you play the phrases. In other words, you'll be able to put these figures together in any order that you want, and really any place on the drums that you want. So I'm going to demonstrate now by using these 2 figures. I'll play a little bit longer phrase, like I'll trade some 8s. And the way that I'll do it is just to improvise some combinations of these figures. So as you can see, the real point here is that by working through this process, you get to the point where you're really improvising with the figures rather than just playing set patterns, or rather than playing the patterns in set ways. And this is a basic kind of routine that you'll find throughout my books and throughout these materials. So it's something that you really want to spend some time with. Okay, the next thing I'd like to talk about is a concept that I call the using things up syndrome. And what that means is a lot of times when students will learn something new, they'll figure out how to do it, and then they think, okay, well, that's what I do with that thing. That's what it's for. But my experience has been that almost everything that you learn to play has many different functions. In other words, you can use the same thing to do different jobs with. And so I'm going to demonstrate by taking these same patterns we've been working on for fills and solos and use them to play time with. And in this case, we're going to use it to set up a halftime shuffle. So to begin with, what I'll do is to just change where I play the pattern on the drums. And in point of fact, that's one of the main differences between playing solos and playing time, is just kind of where you play things. So in this case, I'm going to take the 5-note sticking, but I'll move my right hand over to the hi-hat. So the basic pattern would sound like this. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an accent to this pattern by bringing the single stroke at the beginning of the 5 from the hi-hat over to the snare drum. So here's what that would sound like. Now, to make this into a full feel, I'm again going to add those two 3-note figures at the end. So now my basic phrase will be the 6-note sequence and then 2 of the 3s. 1. Now, when I'm doing this, I can also use those asymmetric type of phrases to set up the feel, and all that will happen is I'll get a different kind of accent line. So let's see what would happen if I use one of the 6s and one of the 3s to set up my basic halftime shuffle. 1. So again, the whole idea is when you find something that will work for a fill or a solo, you want to then take the same kind of material and try it out to play time fills with. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to find some really interesting things. So what this allows you to do is to get more mileage out of things. Rather than them just having one function, everything that you learn may have 3 or 4 different kinds of ways of being used. Now, if I wanted to set up the same kind of phrase in the 16th note rate, I would use some other patterns. And the one that I'm going to use to demonstrate this with is really a 7-note sticking. It has 1 single stroke and 3 double strokes. So the sticking is right, left, left, right, right, left, left. And I'm going to play this in 16th note, so what I'll do is I'll add a bass drum note at the end to make it an 8-note sequence. So I'll play the pattern first out of time on the snare drum, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll move it over to the hi-hat, and then I'll add an accent to it. Now, to make this into my phrase, what I'm going to combine it with is a 3-note sticking. A very simple 3-note sticking that has 1 single and 1 double, right, left, left. And to this sticking, I'm also going to add a bass drum note to make it a 4-note sequence. So the pattern would be right, left, left foot. So obviously this is a 1-beat pattern, and the earlier one was a 2-beat pattern. So I'll play that 8-note sequence, and then 2 of the 4-note sequences following it. Again, I'm going to play it on the snare drum first slowly, and then I'll make it into a time feel. Now, you know what I'm going to do with this after I work it out for a time feel is I'm just going to turn it right around and try to play it as a solo figure. So let's move it around the drums a little bit and make it into a solo idea. 1, 2. So this basic idea about taking patterns and using them for time and then using them for solos is something that you want to work on because it's easy to do. You're using the same stuff. You're pretty much using it in the same ways, so sometimes the motions are a little bit different, and it will give you a lot of new ideas with things that you already know. Okay, you've noticed that when I've been playing these things, I've been moving them around the drums in a lot of different ways. And I want to take a few moments to talk about motion on the drum set and some of the various kinds of routines I use to help students develop facility. We're going to look first at a linear pattern that contains single strokes and bass drum hits. And when you're playing patterns with a lot of single strokes, there's a couple of ways that you can define the types of motions that are available. There are really 3 types of motions. Parallel, where your hands are moving in the same direction. It doesn't matter what the direction is, just as long as they both go the same way. Then there's contrary motion, which means that one hand goes one way and the other hand goes a different way. And then there's what they call oblique motion, which means that one hand stays on one sound and then the other hand moves around to the other sounds. So I'm going to take a 6-note linear figure. This figure, the sticking is right, left, foot, foot. And I'll start by playing a number of different parallel motions. So just watch my moves and notice what it sounds like. Okay, now let's look at some contrary motions where the hands are moving in opposite directions. And the third type of motion is the oblique motion, where one hand is moving and the other hand is staying on a single sound. So let's look at a couple of those. So when you work on these kinds of patterns that have a lot of single strokes in it, what you want to do is to check out all 3 kinds of motions: parallel, contrary, and oblique. And then you'll find that you can really create different little melody lines on the drums by using these different kinds of motions. Now what I'm going to do is to take a second figure. This time I'm going to use an 8-note figure. It's another linear figure, and it has 6 single strokes, right, left, right, left, right, left, and then 2 notes in the bass drum. And I'll just kind of combine some of the different motions, the parallel and the contrary and the oblique. So you'll see some examples of each. Now obviously it would be easy to fit the 6-note figure into a triplet rate and to fit the 8-note figure into a 16th note rate. But actually I can use either in either rhythmic rate. And so what I'm going to do is I'll set up a basic phrase where I'm going to play triplets, and in the first 2 measures I'll play the 6s, but in the second 2 measures I'm going to play the 8-note figures. So again, the figure is going to cycle through the time. So the first time that I play it, I'll just play it on the snare drum, and then I'll move it around the drums a little bit. Okay, now let's take a look at the idea of using different kinds of motions on double strokes. Double strokes is one of the most basic stickings that we learn as drummers, and we normally think of using them in terms of rolls and so forth. But you can really use the doubles to do a lot of interesting things on the drum set. Now basically there's 2 kinds of ways that you can move doubles around. The first way is to just take the double stroke and move it from one sound to another. So I'm going to set up a basic routine here where I'll play doubles. I'll start on the snare drum, then I'm going to take my right hand and move it around to all the other sounds that I have. And I'll do it slowly at first, and then I'll gradually pick the tempo up. Now the thing is, you need to do this starting from every sound on the set, because when you start from a different sound, the motions are going to change. For example, if I started with both of my hands up here on the small tom, these moves would be pretty easy over here, but when I'd get over to this side of the drum set, I'd have to kind of cross over with my right hand to get to those other sounds. So let's see what this would look like. So what you want to do is you want to start the doubles on each sound, and then take your right hand and move it to all the other sounds, and then do the same thing with the left hand. Start on each sound, take your left hand, move that double to all of the different sounds. The second thing that you can do with double strokes is you can take the 2 notes of the double and you can break them up between different sounds. Now you have to move kind of quick to do this, but it's a very interesting device and it will give you a lot of possibilities. So I'm going to demonstrate by taking my right hand double, and what I'll do is I'll play one note down here on the floor tom and then play the other note up here on the snare drum. And again, I'll start it slow and then gradually speed it up. Now you also need to work on moving the other way. In other words, I call this move inward because it's kind of coming in towards me, but I also need to work on the outward motion where I start here and go out to the other sound. So let's see what that would be like. Now there's some interesting things you can do with this. One thing is that when you play things between the drums, they tend to sound, relatively even. But when you play things between cymbals and drums, since the cymbal is a little bit softer to begin with, the drum line kind of comes out, kind of sticks out. And you can use that to your advantage. Now I'm going to demonstrate this process by playing a samba. The traditional bass drum that a lot of guys use to play the samba is the 2/16 notes, da-dung, 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 da-dung. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to set it up so that the double strokes are lined up with my bass drum, so that my right hand double is going to be going right along with my bass drum line. This is to make it easy to play. So here's just the basic pattern, pretty slow, just so you can hear what it will sound like. Now, when I take the broken double stroke and I break it from the cymbal to the snare drum, listen to what the rhythm is that's going to come out on the snare drum. 1, 2. In other words, the rhythm that I get on the snare drum is 1 E and, da-da-da, 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 da-da-da. Now listen to the rhythm that I'll get on the snare drum if I break the double the other way and go from the snare drum out to the cymbal. 1, 2. In that case, I get a syncopated rhythm. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, 3 upbeat 16th notes. So in other words, if I want my snare drum to go da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, I know exactly how to move to get that line to come out on my snare drum. 1, 2. Now, while you're doing this, there's no reason why you have to leave your left hand on the snare drum. It could be doing something at the same time. So let's set up a little routine where we're going to take our left hand double, and we'll play the first one on the snare drum and the second one on the small tom. We'll just move it back and forth, one here and one here. Now, at the same time, I'm going to take my right hand. I'm going to break the double in the first time, break it in the second time, break it out the third time, and break it out the fourth time, which means the first time I come down, the left hand will be here. The next time I come down, the left hand will be up here. Then I'll go out, left hand will be here. Then I'll go out, left hand will be here. So I'll do it very slowly, out of time, and then we'll put it into tempo. Now, if I did the same thing, but instead of having this hand come here, I had it go over here, still had this hand going back and forth, I'm going to get an entirely different line because of the way the notes are going to line up on the different sounds. So let's see what this version would sound like. So by taking this basic concept and using these moving and broken doubles, you can really create a lot of different lines on the drums. You know, you can go down to the floor tom, you can go over to the hi-hat. There's really a lot of different shapes that you can create. So every guy can kind of make up their own version of this routine. Now let's take a look at another thing that you might want to do with the double strokes. You know, double strokes are basically a four-note articulation, two notes with the right and two notes with the left. But what would happen if we use the double strokes in triplets? Then we're going to get some kind of phrasing through the time because of how the double strokes are going to interact in the triplet rhythm. So what I'll do in this case is I'll set up a basic routine where I'll play 4 measures of time, and then I'll just play 4 measures of straight doubles on the drum set so that you can hear what the basic pattern is going to sound like. 1, 2. Now, when I start to move this into the drum set, almost any motion that I play is going to have a lot of 4 to it because the fact that the pattern is 4. So this is actually going to set up some, you know, different kinds of what guys call polyrhythms, different kinds of rhythms inside this pattern. For example, if I take the double stroke in the right hand and I break it between these two sounds, I'm going to set up the rhythm of a half-note triplet on my floor tom. Let's check out what that might sound like. 1, 2. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll play a number of different versions using the doubles in this triplet rate. And you're going to notice that as I move into more elaborate motion combinations, you know, the moving doubles and the broken doubles, you can start playing some things that sound pretty bizarre, but they're just triplets and it's just double strokes. So let's check out a few of these. 1, 2. So one of the little kind of sidebar points here is that how things sound doesn't have much to do with what they are, but it has a lot to do with what you do with them. In other words, you can take things that are very simple and make them sound complicated if you want to. And you can also take things that are pretty complicated to play and make them sound simple if you want to. But this double stroke kind of material is something that I feel most students really neglect, and it's a shame because it's so easy to do and it gives you so much potential. Now for those of you who are interested, there's a long section in the sticking patterns book that runs all of these different exercises down, the moving doubles and the broken doubles and then the various combinations. So that's the source to check out if you really want to get into this kind of material. Now the third type of thing that I want to talk about in terms of motion is when you're using sticking patterns, because most sticking patterns are combining single strokes and double strokes. So we can use both of the kinds of skills that we've been previously working on, the parallel, contrary, and oblique thing from the single stroke stuff, and then the moving and the broken doubles from the double stroke stuff. And I'm going to demonstrate this with a very simple pattern. The old paradiddle diddle. In my sticking system it's called the 6B sticking, but it has 2 single strokes and 2 double strokes. So the sticking is right, left, left, left. And there would be a lot of different ways that I could move this on the drums, but kind of how I think about it is that I work with the single strokes first, and I see what I can do with them. And then I work some with the doubles, trying to move them around a little bit. And then I work some with the doubles, trying to break them up a little bit. So I'm going to play a number of examples here using this one sticking, and just watch the motions and listen to what these various things sound like. So once you've worked on the single stroke moves and the double stroke moves, then when you do a sticking pattern, it's really easy because you've got all of that stuff to work with. And then you can take phrases like this and set them up to play solos or fills. Let's try doing the same thing that we did earlier where we mix those sixes and eights in the triplet rate. And this time, when I do it with stickings, I'll use this pattern for the 6-note sticking. And then for the 8-note sticking, I'm going to use another sticking from my system. It's called the 8D sticking because it has 4 single strokes. And the sticking is right, left, right, left, right, right, left, left. So I'm again going to play a 4-measure phrase where in the first 2 measures I'll play 4 of the 6s, and in the second 2 measures I'll play 3 of the 8s. So first I'll play the pattern just on the snare drum, and then I'll move it around the drums a little bit. Okay, now we're going to look at a sticking phrase that uses that same 5-note sticking that we worked on at the very beginning of this tape, that right, left, right, left, left. And I'm going to set this up as a fill in 16th notes. So I'm going to play 3 of these stickings in a row, which will take the first 15 notes. And then the last note I'll add in the bass drum. So it'll be 5-note sticking, 5-note sticking, 5-note sticking, and 1 note in the bass drum. Here's the pattern just on the snare. Now I'll use that pattern as a fill in some rock time. So sometimes when you use stickings, they may not fill up the complete measure, but that's okay. You just add a couple extra notes in your bass drum or an extra single stroke in your hands. It's not necessary that they always fit perfectly into the time. So if you find a phrase that you like and you need to tweak it a little bit to get it to work in the time, go right ahead and do that. There's no laws against it. Now, one additional thing that I want to mention here is, every time I've been playing examples for you, I would use a certain kind of material. Sometimes it would be sticking stuff, and sometimes it would be linear stuff. But there's also nothing wrong with mixing materials together from different areas. In other words, I can do something that's half sticking and half linear. And this is actually a good thing to do because each of these kinds of materials gives you different things. When you play the stickings, you get all that double stroke stuff so you can move and break up the doubles. But when you play the linear stuff, you get bass drum notes in the line, which is something that doesn't naturally happen in the stickings. It would be something you'd have to add into the sticking. But in the linear, it's already there. So let's take an example by looking at 2 different figures that we've already done here. That 6-note linear pattern, right, left, foot, and that 6-note sticking pattern, right, left, right, right, left, left. And I'll set up a 4-measure phrase where I'll play first the linear figures, and then I'll play the sticking figures. I'll do it first on the snare drum, then I'll put it into time. One, two. So as you can see, there really are a lot of things that you can do with motion on the drums. And every time you take a linear figure, or you take double strokes, or you take a sticking pattern, you want to make it a point to check out these various things, because this will give you the kind of flexibility that will really allow you to improvise. You know, I consider the drums to be a very melodic instrument. In other words, when we play solos, we tend to play more like horn players than we do like keyboard players. I mean, there are certainly harmonic elements involved in drum set playing, but basically what we do is we think of an idea and then we just kind of transfer it onto the drums. So in order to be able to do that fluently, you need to really analyze the motions that are possible, kind of work them out so you feel comfortable with them, and then you'll be able to create many interesting ideas of your own, and that's really the point of playing. Now we're going to take a look at some solo ideas by Steve Smith, another former student and a great friend of mine, and certainly one of the top players in the industry today. And Steve's going to demonstrate some soloing devices using a lot of the motion materials that we had talked about. Uses a lot of the moving doubles and the broken doubles, and I think you're going to find this to be very, very interesting. So check out Steve's version of this material.